Bracket challenge, let's go. Last year I did the NHL.com bracket challenge for the 2017 Stanley Cup playoffs. Some was good, some was bad. I predicted the Capitals would eliminate the Leafs in 6, that was good. I also predicted the Montreal Canadiens would make the conference final, that was bad. This is my 2018 NHL.com bracket challenge. We'll start in the West, the Nashville Predators against the Colorado Avalanche. The statistical story between the two is actually a lot closer than I thought. The Preds destroy the Avs in the face-off dot, but in terms of goals for, they only have a slight advantage, and in fact, on the penalty kill and power play, the Avs are the better team. The big difference is goals against. Colorado allowing nearly 3 goals a game, whereas Nashville is actually allowing less than 2.5. Their D-core is one of the best in the league, and there's a reason Pekka Rinne is in the Vezina conversation. And with the recent injuries the Avalanche have suffered, I just don't see how they pull it off. I have the Predators beating the Avalanche, we'll say in 5 games. Let's go east, the Tampa Bay Lightning against the New Jersey Devils. The numbers matchup is not close. Tampa slaughters New Jersey in almost every statistical category. Their goals against aren't that far apart. Their face-offs aren't that far apart either. Both teams below 50%, by the way. The only real advantage New Jersey has is their penalty kill. Tampa's actually isn't that good. That's surprising. Where it gets interesting is recent history. Tampa started the season like an absolute juggernaut. It looked like nobody was going to beat them, and they've sort of slowed down the stretch. New Jersey, meanwhile, has had to fight and claw their way just to get to this point. And Stanley Cup playoff Taylor Hall is literally a monster we've never met before. Back-to-back Memorial Cups, though. I think Tampa ultimately beats New Jersey, but I think it's going to be a struggle. I'll say 6. Let's go to Winnipeg and Minnesota. Winnipeg's advantages? All of them, apparently. Doesn't get much more definitive than that, does it? I was going to say they're actually not that far apart, and I guess they're not, but the goals and the power play, they're just monstrous. If Minnesota had one thing going for them, it's that in the playoffs, there might be fewer power plays. But just like Nashville, I think Winnipeg is a true contender this year, and they're going to be hard to beat. I got Winnipeg winning that one. I'm going to go out on a limb and say 5 games. Back east, the Boston Bruins against the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, if you're familiar, you already know where my loyalties lie with the Leafs. But last year, I picked the Capitals to beat them, and they did in the amount of games that I set. Here's the matchup. The Leafs have the advantage in goals for and on the power play, but it is not much. Both of these teams are lethal offensively. Both teams have pretty good penalty kills, although Boston has a decided advantage there. Their biggest advantage is in goals against. The Leafs have had to deal with some injuries. I think Boston's have been more recent and more significant. Anderson is going to have to be enormous in this series. Marchand, Bergeron, Pasternak is probably the best line in the entire league. The Leafs have a 30-goal scorer on 3 different lines. Boston has them all on 1. Last year, I went with my head and said Caps. This year, I go with my heart and say Leafs. I think it's going to be a war. I think it's going to go 7 games, but I think ultimately the Leafs pull it off. Unless they get a 4-1 lead in the 3rd, and then I'm going to get a little nervous. Back west, this one's interesting. The Vegas Golden Knights and the LA Kings. First of all, round of applause for the Vegas Golden Knights even getting here. How are you in the playoffs? You're an expansion team. An expansion team who used 5 goalies, one of whom was a WHL player. And now they're the 1 seed in their division taking on a wild card team in the Kings. Just like we all predicted, right? What's the statistical matchup? It's actually pretty interesting. Vegas has a big advantage in terms of goal scoring, but LA's advantage in terms of keeping the puck out of their own net is about as big. Vegas's power play advantage is slight, whereas LA's penalty kill is way better. And what do we always hear about the Kings? They're a big team. They're a heavy team. They are not fun to play against. And they have playoff experience too, a lot of it. That being said, just because the Golden Knights haven't been around long doesn't mean their team doesn't have experience. Marc-Andre Fleury and James Neal, just to name a couple. And also, since winning the Cup in 2014, the Kings haven't exactly had a lot of playoff success. Despite that, however, I'm going to go with an upset. Just call it a hunch. I think the Kings pull this off in 6 games. Caps, Blue Jackets. The matchup for Columbus is bad. The Blue Jackets have the advantage in keeping the puck out. Sergei Bobrovsky is a huge reason for that, but the Caps have basically everything else. Their power play and penalty kill especially is much better than Columbus's, but again, it's the playoffs, so what if the refs put their whistles away? I've said that as a factor before, but it's the first round. As the playoffs go on, stick murder gets more and more legal, but in the first round, really, what Columbus does have is a series-stealing goalie. The Caps have had that done to them before. We also know that the Caps just kind of have this thing about them where they struggle in the playoffs. Braden Holtby has not been good. They've had Philip Grubauer in net. Tortorella versus Barry Trotz. Torts is just going to target those stars in game 1 and 2. This is a case where my gut says Columbus, but I'm going to ignore it. Last year, round 1, I said Caps in 6. I'm going to go with the same thing, but if it goes to 7, Who knows? Anaheim, San Jose. This is a great Pacific matchup. San Jose has an advantage in pretty much everything. The Ducks have an advantage in goals against, but San Jose has a really good penalty kill. And their face-offs, virtually identical. Because Anaheim is the second seed, they technically have the advantage here, but San Jose has been good. Evander Kane has fit in real nice since they got him at the deadline. I think it's going to be a mean series, and it's going to go the distance. 7 games. And I give the advantage to the San Jose Sharks, but it wasn't an easy decision. And one more. What a treat for the hockey world. The Pittsburgh Penguins taking on the Philadelphia Flyers. It's one of my favorite, I think it's my favorite rivalry. Pittsburgh going for a three-peat, but they gotta face their arch nemesis, who, even when they beat them, give them fits. So, Philly has the advantage in the face-off dot, and Pittsburgh has not been good at keeping the puck out of their own net. Philly only has a slight advantage there, though. But Pittsburgh knows how to score. Their power play is otherworldly, and Philly doesn't have a very good penalty kill. What Philly's got to do is they got to do what they've done when they've beaten Pittsburgh before. Get them to stop playing hockey. Stick work, face washes after the whistle. Get them to get into fights. If Claude Giroux, who is roaring into the playoffs after that hat trick in the final game, second in league scoring, feels like not enough people are talking about that. If he can get Crosby and company off of their game, Philly's got a shot. Now that is an if. Matt Murray, if he's 100% healthy, is a different beast, and he'll be going for his 3rd cup as a sophomore. I think it's going to be so fun to watch. I give Pittsburgh the win over Philly. I'm going to say in 6. To recap the first round, Nashville over Colorado, Tampa over New Jersey, Winnipeg over Minnesota, Toronto over Boston, LA over Vegas, Washington over Columbus, San Jose over Anaheim, and Pittsburgh over Philadelphia. In the first round, you're just guessing. In rounds 2, 3, and 4, it's even worse. The world of injuries tends to get in the way. So let's blindly, quickly do this. Nashville versus Winnipeg is nuts. Boy, there is not a whole lot between them. Both like scoring goals. Both are good at keeping it out of their net. I really have no idea. It's impossible to tie. I'll give it to Nashville just on experience. Toronto, Tampa, check this out. Toronto's advantages, believe it or not, almost everything. It's going to be a fast, fun battle of 2 deep blue and white teams. Not deep blue, like they both are blue and white and have depth. You're gonna think I'm crazy? I don't really care. I give it to the Leafs. San Jose, LA. I barely wanted to give the Kings the advantage over Vegas in the first place. I have a hard time saying that they're going to beat the Sharks. I think the Sharks just have too many weapons, and they're going to end up winning that series against their Pacific rival. Pittsburgh versus Washington. Let's stop wasting time. It's Pittsburgh. I mean, Washington has the stats advantage, but we've all seen this movie, haven't we? Maybe it's different this time, but I don't think so. Final 4. Nashville versus San Jose. Toronto versus Pittsburgh. I know I just pish-poshed Washington stats advantage, but look at Nashville versus San Jose. As deep as the Sharks are, I just think Nashville's deeper, and they're going to come away with the win. In the East, Toronto, Pittsburgh. It's actually surprising how closely the Leafs match up to the back-to-back Stanley Cup champs. But one thing I will say about these stats is they're on the whole year. Pittsburgh has just been a team possessed in the second half. LA has played Vegas very well this season, and that's part of the reason I had them beating Vegas. In the same way, when Pittsburgh's healthy, Toronto has a lot of trouble with them. And come on, it's the Penguins. Ultimately, I have the Penguins beating the Leafs. Which leaves us with, oh, doesn't this look familiar? A rematch of last year's Stanley Cup final, the Nashville Predators versus the Pittsburgh Penguins. Here's the stat matchup, just so I can say that I showed you it, but by the Stanley Cup final, by like 2 months from now, there'll be 2 different looking teams, trust me. Pittsburgh and Nashville were like half ECHL teams by the end of it. Injuries bent the Penguins, but they did not break, whereas Nashville just couldn't quite cope with their losses at center. In the offseason and throughout this season, however, Nashville prepared for that scenario. So, in 2008, the Pittsburgh Penguins faced the Detroit Red Wings. Detroit won. The next year in 2009, there was a rematch where Detroit lost to Pittsburgh. And I have the same thing happening in this scenario. The Nashville Predators will get their vengeance over the Pittsburgh Penguins, and in doing so, win their first ever Stanley Cup. And I have to put the amount of goals scored. Last year, I think Nashville had 19 in the Cup final. Let's up that by 1 and times it by 2, 40. So, there it is, my bracket for the 2018 Stanley Cup playoffs. It's probably going to be very wrong. Leave a comment down below. What did I get right and what did I get wrong? What do you think is a lock? What's a series where you think a team is going to win despite all evidence that they're going to lose? Let me know down below, or even tweet it at me at Steve_Dangle. So that is it for this one. Thank you very much for watching. Click like if you like this video. Click subscribe if you really liked it. Tell all your friends that it's playoff time, baby. The 2018 Stanley Cup playoffs are right here.